How's it, stinging honeys? Welcome back to another episode of Post-Face Reveal Rehabilitation. I'm your host. Say hi to Theodore. His little eyes are in there somewhere. Can't find them. Today I felt like drawing, and if you have a problem with that, then I hope you get trapped in a FNAF 1 jump scare loop in your nightmares tonight. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to be drawing. I have a few ideas. I have been watching too much Wendigo. So, probably something Mandela Catalog related, maybe something Good Omens related. Let's just get into it, I guess. I'll see you. Hey guys, voiceover William here. For day one, I decided I would pick a random page from Good Omens and attempt to use that as a prompt, and then just started drawing Gabriel from the Mandela Catalog. I don't like this page. I don't like what I did this day, so we're gonna speed through it pretty quickly. But the page I chose reads as follows. London was not designed for cars. Come to that, it wasn't designed for people. It just sort of happened. This creates problems, and the solutions that were implemented became the next problems, 5 or 10 or 100 years down the line. The latest solution had been the M25, a motorway that formed a rough circle around the city. Up until now, the problems had been fairly basic, things like it being obsolete before they had finished building it, Einsteinian tailbacks that eventually became tail forwards, that kind of thing. The current problem was that it didn't exist, not in normal human spatial terms, anyway. The tailback of cars, unaware of this, or trying to find alternate routes out of London, stretched into the city center from every direction. For the first time ever, London was completely gridlocked. The city was one huge traffic jam. Cars, in theory, give you a terrifically fast method of traveling from place to place. Traffic jams, on the other hand, give you a terrific opportunity to stay still. In the rain and the gloom, while around you the cacophonous symphony of horns grew ever louder and more exasperated. Crowley was getting sick of it. He'd taken the opportunity to reread Aziraphale's notes, and to thumb through Agnes Nutter's prophecies, and to do some serious thinking. His conclusions could be summarized as follows. 1. Armageddon was underway. 2. There was nothing Crowley could do about this. And 3. It was going to happen in Tadfield, or to begin there, at any rate. After that, it was going to happen everywhere. So I definitely feel like I could have done better with this page, but it's okay. It's okay, because Gabriel from the Mandela Catalog is there, and there's blood, so it's gotta be good. And I'm sure that's the last time we'll be seeing blood today, so yeah, that definitely won't be overused or anything, or... Guys, fit check with the hat, and just... I mean, be more fantastic and the Ninth Doctor would be jumping through my window, you know? So I was trying to think of topics I could use to fill the time, and there was really only one thing that sprang to mind, so take that as you will. Before I get into that, though, I'm gonna explain what I'm doing here a little bit. So, I decided I would keep going with, the Mandela Catalog, because that felt like it went a little bit better than anything else on the first page, but this time I had references, so things were infinitely better, and I was more comfortable. But the topic I decided to get into today was a cult of sorts, and that is the cult of fandom. So as a child, I developed extreme parasocial relationships with people on YouTube to be able to cope, and the only reason I bring this up is because I think, at least for me, there's a big relationship between childhood relationships and the unhealthy nature of more teenage fandoms. As a child who was not able to develop maturity-wise as quickly as some other kids because of a variety of things, being in a religious system, not being granted full access to the internet, being thrown into full, real fandom at age 14 was definitely jarring. I would consider some of the YouTubers I watched pre-14 years old as my first fandom experiences, but I was never active online or anything like that, because the only context I had was these YouTubers that I loved so much and had developed parasocial relationships with that were explaining how uncomfortable parts of it were for them. And I wanted no part of that. So my first exposure to online community was, like I said, at age 14, making a TikTok editing account with no experience on two fronts. I had no idea how to edit, and I had no idea what kind of crowd I was getting myself into. Originally, I wasn't gonna name drop the two shows that I had dedicated this account to originally, but I'm going to. These two shows were Supernatural and Criminal Minds, and I feel safe enough to criticize these now openly without getting blocked by a number of users on TikTok. So shows like these have communities everywhere, but very much the Tumblr culture that are labeled as safe spaces and for people that enjoy the same things, and a place where you can share what you think without being punished for it. Now, I think this is true to a certain degree because they do get passionate about it, but I definitely think that passion goes towards the wrong things very frequently, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So these people are labeling these areas of the internet as safe spaces and places where you can freely discuss your opinion about things, and people will be understanding, hopefully. And I'm here to tell you that that is very far from the truth, usually. What these areas of the internet do is they create a code of conduct that you are expected to follow, which kind of feels like it directly contradicts the safe space that accepts all opinions. Now, as a teenager or a person of any age getting into this, it's intimidating, because you suddenly feel like you have to learn all of these new things just to be able to have a platform and discuss. And that takes away from the safety that was promised. When you get into a fandom for the first time, especially one of the hyper-analytical Tumblr age, there are opinions and things that everybody seems to see as fact that you will completely not get, but you will learn to, or at least trick yourself into learning to. Now, as dramatic as this sounds, I can relate this to a feeling of being put into a religious system, or rather forced into one, where you don't fully understand everything that people are saying and everything that people are telling you to believe, but you will learn to, because how can all of these people that have been here for so long be wrong? They have to know more than me, right? Now, by no means are these comparable in the sense that it's the same level of manipulation and the same intensity of the effects on children or people brought into them, but I do believe that pressure is there. Fandoms are the naive equivalent of teenagers getting the opportunity to run a cult. And it was effective. I joined. So, now, I don't believe this to be the fault of the community, for a few reasons. It definitely is to a certain extent. But one, obviously, most of these people are teens, or even preteens, and they're just trying to reach people and have a good time, and they are prone to that mob mentality of always having to have sides that are fighting each other. But that does not have to be the case. I think part of the blame should be put on the content itself in some cases, because I believe the frequency of development of these extremist opinions reflects the quality of the content in some cases. Now, I'm not using this to bash any of the early Tumblr fandoms. I was very heavily involved, and I mean, still am to a certain extent. I understand it. Like I said, these are teenagers trying to get attached to something, much like my parasocial relationships with people as a child, just to be able to cope. And I understand that. And that's where I think the fault of people within the creation of the content might be an issue. So shows like the two that I mentioned, I feel have a very heavy reliance on actors in a gross, bad way. they know these people are desirable. And that's not just an issue in fandom, that's an issue in all of production. I think they're aware, just from the response from the audience, that they can let their quality drop a little bit, and it'll be completely fine, because not only do these people make up excuses and explanations for your bad writing and for your bad choices in story, but they also just think the actors and characters are attractive most of the time. And a lot of the time, that can make up for a lot, unfortunately. I'm not saying in any way that the behavior of these fandoms sexualizing these characters and actors is okay, because it is not, but I also don't think that showrunners should be using this as a safety net of sorts. And it definitely feels like they do, because they are aware of their viewership, they are aware of what people talk about, and sometimes, unfortunately, it's not just teenagers who you can decide if they should or shouldn't know better by now, but sometimes it is adults who are sexualizing these people who should absolutely know that they should not be doing that, and that can truly affect somebody. They're a real person. They're not just a character. You can make up for very superficial, stupid, cliche, tropey stories. I know I just threw out a lot of words that are going to make people really mad, but you can get away with that because your community is practically writing the show for you. So I've come up with something that I'm going to refer to as the superficial analytical relationship theory, which I'm totally not excited about at all, and I'm totally not in an AP Psych class right now, so that has nothing to do with it. But the core of this is basically the more superficial and more surface level you make your story, the more a community is going to latch onto it. Because there's more to work with. There is more that they feel they can add on and fix, in a sense. But they don't know that they're fixing it. They think that you guys were geniuses all along, and you're definitely going to play into that. But fundamentally, the more superficial you make something, the more analytical people are going to be, and the more people are going to read into very small little things. And how you handle that reflects the quality of production, in a way. So the less substance you give something, the more the more people are going to read into facial expressions of the actors that the actors might not even be aware that they're doing. The more people are going to gauge their interest on attraction to a character or an actor because your storytelling and writing isn't what's doing it. These people have become emotionally invested because they have come up with their own idea of your character, because your idea of that character was not in depth enough for that kind of person. Now, I'm not saying every kind of storytelling that has superficial writing or story is with malicious intent, but what I am saying is a show with 15 seasons should not be making a character that is just completely there to make fun of the fan base, when you are at least partially responsible for their inappropriate reaction to your content. Not only that, but making fun of the people who have built this show from the ground, because you latch onto things that they come up with because you know they're going to like it, and then you take credit for it. You see how that's an issue? Now, there's another thing about this that I would say is on the community, but again, these are borderline children, but developing parasocial relationships with actors like you would with a character is not good and not healthy. People make excuses for the questionable behavior of these actors and showrunners because they feel like they know them, and they feel like, oh, they wouldn't do something like this, or they wouldn't feel this way, or they wouldn't have this political belief. But you don't know them. You know the character that you formed, that they had no part in making, because the community is very, very responsible for what came out of this show. So I know this has been a lot, but I'm going to talk about the Mandela catalog and analog horror in general, and how it does a fairly good job at combating the issues with fandom. And I was drawing things related to the Mandela catalog, and I said nothing about it. So, analog horror usually requires a lot of thought and care being put into it to be able to understand the overarching story. The Mandela catalog in particular is an amazing example of somebody who started very low with just editing on his phone and a story to tell. This narrative is also so complex and kind of difficult to figure out that it keeps the fandom busy without them having to go off on their own narratives. Plus, the story is well written and well produced, and the quality has gone up so much that it's just fascinating to be able to see the progress. This allows the creator to take fan input in a good way because he cares enough about his story to know what fits and what doesn't. And fan input is valuable because they have taken the time to understand the story. They understand the characters on a deeper level than those who have a superficial story to work with. Now, this was day 3 at this point, and I was following a prompt that I had actually gotten from Winter to draw the woman described in Thermodynamic Lawyer by Will Wood. And on that little card there, I had some of the descriptive lines. Those read, pulls back skinny lips to reveal a proboscis, the fly inspiration, blood vessels drying and curling inside are unfurling from out of her wrists, and foams at the mouth / bruises. So that's what I was working with. I took quite a literal interpretation of this, so if that's disappointing in any way, I'm sorry. But let's get back to the topic at hand. So we've established that fandoms gravitate towards not fully established content and content that they can make their own. But what happens when they don't? What happens when they gravitate towards something that is very well thought out and has a very, very information-dense story? Fandoms are not built for information-packed, dense content. They don't know how to handle it. When attempting to make it their own, they sometimes turn into the ones making the superficial narratives, and it becomes sort of backwards. But with fandoms, they are selectively superficial. Let me explain what I mean. Fandoms, because they're made up of heavily young audiences, they usually latch on to very specific parts of a story, like the romantic or simple things that they find clever or funny, and they really run with that. I mean, you'd think they could really only go so far with the fact that Crowley doesn't know how to walk, and the 10th Doctor runs, and Dean Winchester likes to eat, which is like so quirky of him. Also that he likes men. They will focus so much on the romantic aspects of a story that they will completely forget the very, very important other aspects, and maybe completely ignore them, and maybe contradict them. Now, with the previous section, I did some name dropping for the content I was talking about, so I guess I'll do it here too. The more in-depth content I'm referring to is Doctor Who and Good Omens, which have nothing in common. And with Good Omens, I'm more specifically referring to Season 2, because Season 1, I believe, was more superficial, which I'll explain may not necessarily be a bad thing in another video that should be coming out at some point. So anyone familiar with Doctor Who knows that it's a very long, convoluted story, and where the Mandela Catalog fandom takes the time to figure things out and appreciates it for its complexity, sometimes the Doctor Who fandom doesn't take the same time. And I'm not saying you need to know absolutely everything about Doctor Who to have discussions about it. That would be hypocritical, considering my stance on fandoms. But when you're doing the fandom thing of creating your own narratives, you need to be sure that you're adding something and not ignoring something or making it more superficial than it was originally. I'm also not saying these shows are immune to some of the things about the other shows, because at times it feels things are being taken advantage of and it feels that the writing may be weak. But I feel there are more fans who do truly understand what the writers are going for and the overarching story than maybe even the writers do of those other shows. And I believe there's a right way to go about this where you can be actively involved in the community, but also appreciate the story for what it is, and be able to create your own opinions without that pressure. I think with fandoms, you have to find that sweet spot where you can create that safe space, but you have to create it for yourself. You can be excited and passionate about things without having to fact check it with their code of of conduct. And you can share your thoughts and share what you've made and allow others to see what you see and get passionate about what you've made. But you can't take criticism too seriously, and you can't get so involved that their opinions become your own. Where fandom gets dangerous is the mob mentality, and also, obviously, the mistreatment of the people who give you the source material. And with respect to those people who have made the show and to those acting in it, as well as a certain distance from the fandom itself, I feel like you can create a very healthy, safe space. And maybe I'm biased because I found that middle ground with these two shows and not the two others, but I still believe it is connected to the quality and the care from the showrunners and the actors and everybody involved in production. It can get to a dangerous spot where if you share your opinions, you're succumbing to popular opinion, but if you have your own, you're just saying that for attention, which gives you criticism from the fandom either way, which is dangerous, and you shouldn't have to worry about that. It may get to the point where stepping away from a show's fandom makes you appreciate the content more, and I think whatever makes you appreciate it more is very worth it. Again, I think the real villains here are the showrunners who take advantage of the community for the content itself and other people in the production industry for their draw from the audience. And the other villains being those who should know better, who sexualize and demean actors and people in the industry. And none of this at all is to blame the people who use this as a way to cope, because I understand it. And that sense of community, whether it's toxic or not, can do a lot for somebody who feels like they're alone. But I urge you to try to find that healthy balance and recognize the issues with it, even if you're still involved. Now, I want to take a minute to talk about fan fiction, because it is a very big part of fandom and its culture, I guess. Now, the reason these tend to get so graphic and intimate is because of the demographic. It's teens and young teens who are just discovering all of this stuff. Again, comes to personal judgment of where you should draw the line of where somebody should know better that it's not okay to sexualize. And if you believe it's different if a character is being described instead of an actor. I personally debate this with myself all the time, because I know from personal experience that you do not expect what you put out there to be seen by these people. But that doesn't excuse how you're treating them. Just because they don't find out doesn't mean it's not inappropriate. But you could also argue that this is just people's creative interpretation of the content. So I think you really just have to go off of the actor's feelings on it. If the actor you're describing has expressed discomfort, don't let the impossibility of them being aware of what you're putting out make it okay, because it's not. If the actor has explicitly said that they are uncomfortable with this, just respect that. And if they haven't said anything, you sort of have to assume that they're uncomfortable with it. But I think that concludes my discussion on fandom. So I suppose I can actually talk about what you're seeing now. So Thermodynamic Lawyer by Willwood and the Tapeworms is a song that describes a toxic relationship very gorily and uncomfortably. This woman that Will is describing is simultaneously visibly upsetting, but he uses the description to showcase the toxicity of the situation, sometimes literally describing toxicity using acid. She seems to be a very manipulative figure who uses disorders as an excuse for her actions. The line about blood vessels from the wrists is definitely in reference to self-life-ending tendencies. Will implies that the source of all of this evil action is her, and that she's always had evil intentions underneath all of the blame shifting. She also seems to give herself bruises in order to blame Will, and because of all of this, he believes the only way to truly give her the right punishment is physical violence. So he, in gruesome detail, describes what he would do to her, and it is crazy. It's a really, really good song, and it sounds really cool, and along with the rest of the album, it is just... it's put together beautifully. What makes Will's music so exciting and beautiful is the effort that it takes to figure out what the fuck he's talking about, because it is quite difficult. His figurative language is wild, and it's always used so well and so unique, and I adore his music. He's probably my favorite artist of all time. I can also confirm that when you've chosen to analyze a Will Wood song for an English assignment, and they ask you to analyze some of the figurative language, it's a very difficult task to pick and choose, because his entire song usually is made up of figurative language. And honestly, tying into the topic, the Will Wood fandom seems to be pretty decent, although there have been a few duds. Like, I heard about some fans, like, giving Will, like, dead rats or something at a show, which is, like, ridiculous. And then obviously there was a fake controversy where someone completely fabricated him being a groomer, I think, and that was not good. But for the most part, they just seem to be a really passionate group of people that really love his music and really just want to talk about how he's captured emotions that they didn't think were possible to be, like, expressed. So, you know, it's cool. If you're familiar with him at all, you probably know that he has stopped making music for the time being, but I'd honestly be happy with either outcome of him coming back from hiatus or not, because I'm very happy with what we have, and it's legitimately perfect. But if he did come back, I'd obviously be screaming about it online and listening to it at the minute of the release. So, clearly I was not immune to adding blood to this too, which is kind of my downfall, but that's, you know, it's there. I think it looks kind of cool. Probably not necessary. I think this page is pretty cool, but I think I like the second page the most, just because I was working with references, and it's about the Mandela catalog, so I really adore it, and you can't really go wrong with that. With that, you're gonna go back to seeing my face, and so I might look a couple weeks older. Painstaking editing and a birthday later, I'm done with this. I hope you enjoyed. Theodore's still alive, somehow. Had a lot of fun making this, so if you want to see it again, you know what to do. Break into my house in the middle of the night. Give me kisses on the cheek. Please. I hope you had fun. You probably didn't. It was a lot of words. I had fun, so. As always, keep stinging, honeys. I love you.